Now, what about Princess Beatrice and Eugenie? They've, of course, fled the UK and are reportedly barely holding it together.
This morning, a single leaked letter from Princess Beatrice completely shattered the fragile peace inside Buckingham Palace. She has spent her entire life staying silent, playing the loyal soldier while her family crumbled around her. But lines have been crossed, and she is finally telling the truth about the king, the hidden power struggles, and what really happened behind closed doors. The royal family wanted this hidden forever, but it is too late. The chaos has already begun. The midnight memo that broke palace walls. A heavy rain beat against the tall glass windows of Royal Lodge in Windsor. Inside, an encrypted messaging app chimed on a secure smartphone. It was just after midnight. A senior communications officer for the king stared at the screen. The message contained a text file leaked from a private domain. The digital signature belonged to Princess Beatrice. Within 20 minutes, emergency phone calls woke up 3 different royal households. The palace staff did not put out a statement. They did not notify the press. They locked down the server. The initial panic came down to timing. King Charles was resting at Sandringham following his medical treatments. The institution worked for months to show a unified front to the public. Press releases kept emphasizing stability. Official photographs showed a smooth, relaxed operation. Then this text file appeared in a shared folder used by high-level legal advisors. It was not a casual complaint. It was a formal, multi-page layout detailing years of institutional decisions. The document focused heavily on the internal management of family crises. For years, the public believed Beatrice stayed completely out of the political landscape. She kept her official events minimal. She never granted explosive interviews. Yet the leaked file showed she kept exhaustive records of every major family meeting since late autumn of 2019. The immediate mystery for the palace staff was tracking the source of the leak. Beatrice used a private email relay commonly used by its corporate executives to protect sensitive contract negotiations. The tech team at Buckingham Palace scrambled to see if her account suffered an external hack. If a foreign entity stole the file, the legal exposure was massive. If she sent it intentionally, the family faced a total civil war. The staff got their answer by 2 o'clock that morning. A close aide confirmed Beatrice personally authorized the transmission of the document to a select group of legal analysts. It was a deliberate move. She wanted the text reviewed outside the standard royal legal network. The traditional palace lawyers were completely bypassed. With that mystery solved, a much larger question surfaced for the aides trying to contain the damage. The text contained a highly specific word-for-word account of a private conversation between Beatrice and King Charles. The meeting took place in a small sitting room at Clarence House just 3 weeks prior. According to the document, Beatrice confronted the king directly about the future of her sister, Eugenie. The king allegedly made a final decision regarding their official status during that meeting. He told her the budget for non-working royals was entirely gone. Beatrice wrote down his exact phrase. He told her that some branches of the family must learn to disappear from the public ledger entirely. It was a cold directive wrapped in administrative language. Beatrice did not leave the room quietly. The file notes that she reminded the king of the specific sacrifices her father made to keep certain institutional secrets out of the American press. She openly questioned why those sacrifices bought security for other senior royals, while she and her sister were left completely exposed to public scrutiny. The text cuts off right after she asked the king who really benefited from their family's silence. The tension inside the communication office spiked as they realized the full implications. This was not a standard leak about family arguments or sibling rivalry. It was a direct challenge to how the king handled the family's internal power structure. Beatrice was no longer acting as the quiet, reliable peacemaker. She was treating the palace like a corporate adversary. By sunrise, the legal teams drafted a series of strict non-disclosure reminders for all secondary staff members. The palace wanted to ensure no one confirmed the existence of the midnight text file to the morning news editors. They needed time to craft a counter-strategy. They needed to find out exactly who else held a copy of Beatrice's statement. The fragile peace of the monarchy was officially over, and the real battle for control was just beginning behind closed doors. Living in the shadow of the York downfall. A black royal sedan pulled up to the rear entrance of Royal Lodge on a cold November afternoon in 2019. Prince Andrew stepped out of the vehicle and walked straight into his private study. His daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, were already waiting inside. The television in the corner was playing a preview of the upcoming Newsnight interview. That 90-minute broadcast would permanently dismantle their father's public life. Beatrice sat on the edge of a green leather sofa, holding a notepad. She had spent the previous 48 hours trying to convince palace officials to cancel the filming. Her advice was completely ignored. The public fallout was instantaneous. Within a week, major corporate sponsors pulled their funding from the Duke of York's charitable foundations. The palace issued a formal statement confirming the prince would step back from public duties for the foreseeable future. Behind the scenes, the financial reality hit the York household immediately. The official royal stipend used to maintain the 30-room property was placed under review. Beatrice found herself in a precarious position. She was a non-working royal with a full-time corporate job in tech. Yet her entire personal security detail depended on her family's standing with the Queen. The tension grew sharper during the monthly family budget meetings at Windsor. Senior palace accountants demanded a full audit of Royal Lodge's expenses. Beatrice personally reviewed the ledger entries. She discovered that several private security contracts were quietly transferred to her own name to save the family from public embarrassment. The institution wanted the York name completely out of the news cycle. To achieve this, they expected Beatrice to pay the premium for discretion out of her own pocket. This arrangement created a deep rift between the sisters and the central household. For months, the British press reported that Beatrice was fully supportive of the palace's handling of her father. The headlines claimed she agreed with the stripping of his military titles. In reality, Beatrice was documenting the exact cost of her compliance. She saved every bank transfer receipt, every email from the master of the household, and every legal bill tied to the estate. A sudden change in the palace security roster raised a massive red flag for Beatrice. In the autumn of 2021, her taxpayer-funded police protection was officially removed. The palace claimed it was a standard cost-cutting measure for extended family members. Yet, Beatrice noticed that other minor royals who held no public duties kept their full security teams during official travel. She demanded to know who authorized the specific removal of her protection. The answer came from a leaked internal memo from the Home Office. The document revealed that senior members of the royal households explicitly recommended the removal of security for the York sisters to appease public critics. It was a calculated PR sacrifice. The palace used Beatrice and Eugenie as a shield to prove they were tightening the royal budget while protecting the core inner circle. Beatrice did not accept the decision quietly. She used her own salary to hire a private security firm specializing in high-net-worth individuals. This move created a fresh mystery for palace officials. The private security team required access to royal palaces for official family events, like weddings and funerals. The palace security apparatus refused to share encrypted radio frequencies with a private firm. Beatrice countered by threatening to boycott the next major family gathering entirely, which would signal a public split to the international press. The palace blinked first. They granted temporary clearance codes to Beatrice's private team for a major event at St. George's Chapel, but the victory was short-lived. The arrangement was strictly temporary, and every renewal required a formal submission to the king's private secretary. Beatrice realized her independence was being managed like a corporate lease. The biggest shock came when Beatrice discovered a hidden clause in the Royal Lodge lease agreement. The document, signed decades prior, allowed the Crown Estate to reclaim the property if the occupant failed to maintain it to specific historic standards. The palace began sending inspectors to the property every 6 months. They cited minor issues like peeling paint on the exterior walls and overgrown gardens. It was a slow, administrative eviction process. Beatrice began tracking these inspections alongside the public statements made by the palace regarding a modernized monarchy. She realized the long-term plan was not just to reduce their funding. The goal was to erase the York branch from the physical map of Windsor. She took her notes, her security logs, and her financial statements, and placed them into a secure digital vault. The quiet princess was no longer just protecting her father's legacy. She was building an ironclad case for her own survival. The Secret Allegiance. With the Sussexes. A server in a private dining room at a Mayfair hotel cleared away 2 untouched cups of herbal tea. Princess Beatrice sat near the corner window, her eyes fixed on a black Mercedes parked across the street. It was May of 2023, just 2 days after the coronation of King Charles. The man sitting opposite her was an intermediate representative for the Duke of Sussex. He slid the encrypted USB flash drive across the white tablecloth. Beatrice did not pick it up immediately. She waited for the waiter to close the heavy oak door behind him. The public narrative surrounding the coronation focused entirely on Prince Harry's isolated position. Television cameras showed him sitting 3 rows back, separated from his brother and father. He left for Heathrow Airport immediately after the ceremony concluded. The press reported a complete breakdown in communication between California and London. Yet, the electronic logs on the Mayfair hotel server showed that Beatrice checked into the private suite under an assumed corporate alias just 4 hours after Harry's plane departed. The alliance between Beatrice and Harry was built on a very specific piece of shared history. When the Sussexes relocated to California in 2020, the palace required them to hand over the keys to Frogmore Cottage. The public assumed the property sat empty until the king offered it to Prince Andrew. In reality, Beatrice and her husband quietly used the cottage as a temporary base during the transition period. During those months, Beatrice discovered a cache of personal correspondence left behind in a study drawer. The letters contained detailed logistics about the initial negotiations for the Sussex departure. More importantly, they revealed the exact names of the palace aides who leaked negative stories about Meghan to the British tabloids. Harry knew these leaks were happening, but he lacked the internal paper trail to prove which specific offices were responsible. Beatrice now held that paper trail. The mystery for the king's security team was tracking how Harry obtained highly specific details about palace staffing changes before they became official. In early 2024, Harry launched a series of high-profile legal challenges against the British press regarding phone hacking. His legal submissions contained internal email addresses and direct phone extensions that only an active member of the household could possess. The palace launched an internal investigation to find the mole. They focused their search on disgruntled IT staff and former press secretaries. They spent 3 months auditing the digital access logs of Buckingham Palace communications workers. They found nothing. The investigation closed without an answer because they looked in the wrong place. The source was not a staff member. Beatrice used her personal security clearance to access the main archival server during her weekend visits to Windsor Castle. She passed the data directly to Harry's legal representative during their monthly meetings in Mayfair. The tension within this hidden relationship spiked during the planning phase of Harry's memoir. The palace legal team warned all senior royals that cooperating with the book would result in a permanent removal of their royal status. Beatrice faced a massive dilemma. If Harry named her as an ally, her standing with King Charles would vanish instantly. If she cut Harry off, she lost her only leverage against the central household. The resolution came down to a specific compromise documented on the Mayfair USB drive. Harry agreed to omit Beatrice and Eugenie from any critical chapters regarding the York family's finances. In return, Beatrice provided him with a detailed timeline of how the palace structured its private media briefings during the autumn of 2019. She proved that the household intentionally amplified her father's scandals on specific days to distract the public from controversial decisions regarding royal spending. With that issue resolved, a new complication emerged. The king's private secretary noticed a pattern in Beatrice's travel schedules. Every time she traveled to New York for her corporate tech job, her itinerary included a 48-hour window, with no scheduled business meetings or public appearances. A security officer noted that her private security team deactivated their tracking beacons during these specific windows. The palace suspected she was flying to California for direct meetings at the Montecito estate. If the press photographed Beatrice entering Harry's home, the illusion of a unified royal front would dissolve on the front pages of the morning papers. The king's office issued a quiet directive to the Diplomatic Protection Command. They requested a full log of her international flight and manifests through private aviation hubs. Beatrice anticipated the move. She did not fly to California. Instead, she used a secure video conferencing suite owned by her tech firm in downtown Manhattan. The network used enterprise-grade encryption that bypassed the standard monitoring systems used by British intelligence services. On the other end of the screen sat Harry and a team of American crisis management experts. During these digital sessions, Beatrice helped draft a secondary strategy. They were not just sharing old secrets, they were coordinating a mutual defense pact. If the palace attempted to evict Prince Andrew from Royal Lodge, Harry's legal team would immediately release the documents showing how the palace used the York family as a public relations shield. Beatrice was no longer just a passive observer of the royal drama. She was actively managing a cross-Atlantic network designed to check the power of the king. The document she compiled did not just contain complaints about security or housing. It held a complete map of institutional decision-making over a 5-year period. She knew exactly which meetings were recorded, which promises were broken, and who authorized the budget cuts that targeted her sister. The final entry on the Mayfair Drive was a single sentence written by Beatrice herself. It stated that if the monarchy wanted to streamline its operations, it would have to account for every casualty left behind in the process. Reeling from the ultimate betrayal. A courier envelope sat on the central mahogany desk inside the Prince of Wales's office at Kensington Palace. The date stamped on the delivery slip was October the 14th, 2024. Prince William picked up the thick stack of papers inside. It was a comprehensive audit of the Duchy of Cornwall's security expenditures for the previous fiscal year. One specific line item stood out. A budget allocation for protective tracking systems had been altered. The signature authorizing the change did not belong to a staff accountant. It was the personal mark of Princess Beatrice. The official guidelines for royal protection were updated earlier that spring. The Home Office released a public brief outlining a streamlined defense strategy for extended family members. The document stated that only active frontline working royals would receive state-funded security coverage during private travel. The public accepted this as a logical financial choice. The press praised the institution for reducing the taxpayer burden during an economic downturn. The internal reality inside the palace offices was entirely different. Beatrice reviewed the complete financial ledger during a scheduled meeting with the duchy auditors. She discovered that while her own taxpayer-funded protection was completely eliminated, a separate private fund was established under the Duchy of Cornwall's administrative umbrella. This fund quietly covered the travel security costs for Prince William's immediate circle, including non-working associates who held no official public roles. The state budget cuts were a public relations illusion. The money was simply moved from one account book to another. The discovery caused immediate friction between the York sisters and Kensington Palace. Beatrice requested an official meeting with Prince William's private secretary to discuss the discrepancy. Her request was delayed for 3 consecutive weeks. Staff members cited scheduling conflicts tied to upcoming international tours. Beatrice realized the delay was intentional. The palace was trying to wait out the fiscal quarter before addressing her concerns. The situation escalated when Beatrice obtained a copy of a confidential security assessment from the Metropolitan Police. The report evaluated threat levels for all descendants of Queen Elizabeth II. The data showed that Beatrice and Eugenie faced identical risk profiles to other senior family members due to their high public profile. Yet, the palace administration overrode the police recommendations. They explicitly instructed the committee to drop the York sisters from the priority coverage list. The mystery for Beatrice was finding out who personally initiated the order to strip their protection while keeping the alternative funding secret. She spent weeks tracking the email chain through the duchy's digital registry. The breakthrough came from an automated backup log from the palace IT department. The log showed a direct directive sent from William's personal office to the security committee chairman. The note specified that resources must be concentrated entirely on the direct line of succession. The York branch was classified as a secondary liability. Beatrice confronted William during a private gathering at Windsor Castle shortly after discovering the email. The conversation did not take place in an official meeting room. It happened in the corridor near the state apartments. William defended the decision by citing the long-term survival of the institution. He told her the public would no longer tolerate funding for extended family members who do not carry out full-time engagements. Beatrice countered by pointing to the private duchy fund she discovered in the audit. She asked him why the rules applied strictly to her and Eugenie, while his own chosen inner circle benefited from hidden financial cushions. William did not offer an explanation for the separate ledger. He simply stated that the management of the duchy funds was entirely under his legal discretion as the Prince of Wales. The meeting ended without a resolution. The fallout from that confrontation altered Beatrice's entire approach to palace politics. She refused to attend the next 3 administrative strategy meetings for the Windsor estate. Instead, she hired an independent legal firm specializing in trust law and historic crown contracts. She wanted a full review of her grandfather, Prince Philip's private will and testament. The public assumes royal wills remain permanently sealed to protect family privacy. This is standard legal practice in the United Kingdom. However, as a direct descendant, Beatrice held a specific legal right to review clauses regarding personal property distribution and family stipends. Her legal team spent November of 2024 examining the archived estate documents at a secure facility in London. They discovered a specific trust fund established by Prince Philip in the late 1990s. The fund was explicitly designed to protect the financial independence of his granddaughters, regardless of their future standing as working or non-working royals. The documents showed that a substantial sum was earmarked to cover long-term personal security and housing maintenance for both Beatrice and Eugenie. The fund was supposed to activate automatically upon his passing. The discovery revealed the ultimate betrayal. The Central Palace administration had quietly absorbed the management of that specific trust fund into the general sovereign grant accounts after 2021. They used Prince Philip's private legacy to offset general operational costs, effectively hiding the money that was legally intended to protect the York sisters. The palace had spent years telling Beatrice there was no budget available, while sitting on the very funds her grandfather left behind to guarantee her safety. Beatrice did not launch an immediate lawsuit. She knew a public court battle over a royal will would damage the entire family structure. Instead, she took the complete legal dossier, including the original trust clauses and the Duchy of Cornwall audit, and added them to her growing digital archive. She sent a single, unredacted copy of the file to the King's private secretary with a brief note attached. The note stated that if the trust funds were not restored to their original purpose by the end of the current financial year, the entire package would be handed over to the independent parliamentary committee that reviews royal expenditures. The quiet princess had officially drawn her line in the sand, and the palace now knew exactly what she was capable of doing to protect her sister and herself. The 2 words, Charles suffered to hear. A tray filled with untouched medical charts and a cold cup of Earl Grey tea sat on a side table at Highgrove House. The calendar on the wall marked the 2nd week of December, 2024. King Charles sat near the hearth, holding a printed copy of the legal dossier Beatrice had sent to his private secretary. His medical team had spent the previous 48 hours advising him to minimize his daily workload, to avoid unnecessary physical stress. He ignored their advice. He spent the entire morning reviewing the explicit details of the absorbed trust funds. The palace press office continued to stick to its official routine. They released statements about the king's ongoing recovery and his deep appreciation for public support. They posted photographs of him greeting local dignitaries in the gardens. The public saw a monarch managing his health with quiet dignity. They did not see the emergency strategy meetings happening in the adjacent drawing room. The internal power dynamic shifted significantly when Queen Camilla entered the discussion. She viewed Beatrice's legal ultimatum as a direct threat to the stability of the entire household. Camilla had spent years working with advisors to secure a specific streamlined public image for the core family unit. Her priority was protecting the king's energy and focus during his medical treatments. She believed the York sisters were exploiting a moment of physical vulnerability within the monarchy to force a financial settlement. Camilla took immediate administrative action. She instructed the master of the household to schedule an emergency meeting at Clarence House. She sent a direct message to Beatrice's private office, bypassing the standard royal scheduling pool. The invitation was formal, but the underlying intent was clear. The Queen wanted to settle the trust dispute before the dossier reached any external parliamentary review boards. Beatrice responded to the invitation within an hour. She did not agree to the meeting. She sent a brief, 2-word reply through her independent legal representatives: no negotiation. This blunt refusal shocked the senior palace staff. For decades, minor royals followed an unwritten rule. When a reigning monarch or their spouse requested an audience, attendance was mandatory. Beatrice completely broke that protocol. The mystery for the king's inner circle was understanding why Beatrice felt secure enough to reject a direct request from Clarence House. They knew she held the financial records regarding Prince Philip's trust fund, but legal documents alone rarely gave a minor royal this much political leverage against the crown. The aides suspected she possessed a secondary piece of information that made her entirely immune to standard palace pressure. The true source of her confidence came to light through a routine digital audit of the Windsor Castle Security Registry. A senior technician discovered that Beatrice had requested physical access to the private diaries of Queen Elizabeth II during the summer of 2023. The late Queen kept handwritten records of every private family decision made during her 70-year reign. These diaries were stored in a secure vault within the royal archives. The palace assumed the archives were entirely locked down after the Queen's passing. Access required a signature from the keeper of the privy purse. However, Beatrice held a legacy authorization granted to her by the late Queen herself during the final months of her life. Beatrice used this clearance to read the specific volumes covering the early 1990s. This was the exact period when Prince Andrew's financial arrangements were first structured by the state. The diaries contained explicit notes written by Queen Elizabeth regarding the true destination of certain offshore funds. The documents proved that the Crown had quietly moved significant assets into private holding companies to shield them from public tax investigations. Prince Philip's trust fund for his granddaughters was legally tied to these specific protected accounts. If Beatrice released her dossier to Parliament, she wouldn't just expose a dispute over security budgets. She would reveal a multi-decade system of royal asset management that the state had kept hidden from public auditors since 1993. This discovery changed the entire nature of the conflict. The tension inside the king's study was no longer about family disagreements or housing allocations. It was about preventing a systemic crisis that could trigger a full parliamentary investigation into the royal family's private wealth. Camilla realized that standard non-disclosure agreements would not stop Beatrice. The princess held the keys to the family's most sensitive financial secrets. The king personally intervened to break the deadlock. He overrode the queen's aggressive strategy and ordered his private secretary to draft a compromise framework. He offered to restore the original value of Prince Philip's trust fund using private funds from the privy purse, bypassing the Duchy of Cornwall accounts entirely. The offer included an independent security guarantee for Beatrice and Eugenie during all official family appearances. The resolution seemed straightforward, but the palace soon discovered a new complication. Beatrice did not accept the initial draft of the compromise. She demanded that the financial restoration be made part of the public registry, rather than a hidden, private transaction. She wanted the public to see that the funds belonged to her sister and herself by right of inheritance, not as a casual gift from the current monarch. The palace legal team strongly advised against a public registry entry. They argued that revealing a sudden influx of private wealth to the York sisters would provoke intense media scrutiny regarding the source of the money. It would invite the exact questions about tax structures that they were trying to avoid. The institution was trapped in a legal loop of its own making. By the middle of December, the negotiations stalled completely. The king remained at Highgrove, his recovery slowed by the constant administrative pressure. Beatrice stayed at her private residence, continuing her daily corporate tech schedule without making any public statements. Her silence became her most powerful weapon. Every day the palace spent waiting for her next move was a day they spent managing a potential constitutional crisis behind closed doors. The tension spread to other branches of the family. Minor royals who relied on the central household for housing and stipends began asking their own legal advisors to review their inheritance clauses. The fear of a wider financial rebellion grew among the senior aides. They realized that Beatrice had created a blueprint for defiance. She proved that a quiet princess could challenge the core structure of the monarchy if she held the right documents and possessed the courage to use them. The ultimate question for the king's advisors was no longer how to silence Beatrice. It was how to prevent her sister, Princess Eugenie, from taking the final step. While Beatrice managed the legal archive in London, Eugenie remained in regular contact with their father at Royal Lodge. The palace knew that if Eugenie decided to back her sister's claims with a public statement of her own. The division within the family would become irreversible. The fragile illusion of a unified royal house was cracking under the weight of its own hidden history, and the next 24 hours would determine who truly held the power in the modern era. The unraveling of the new royal order. An unmarked delivery van pulled away from the security gates of 10 Downing Street. Inside the building, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff walked an official red box straight into a private briefing room. The date on the security log was January the 8th, 2025. Prince William was already waiting inside, seated at the long conference table. He had traveled from Adelaide Cottage without his standard press convoy. On the table lay an advance copy of a parliamentary inquiry schedule regarding Crown asset transparency. Princess Beatrice's legal dossier was listed as an official appendix. The public schedule for the upcoming months focused heavily on the King's vision for a streamlined monarchy. The press office drafted numerous articles detailing a smaller, more efficient core team of working royals. The narrative emphasized value for the modern taxpayer. The public approved of the reduced headcount. They believed the institution was modernizing itself for a new era. The internal reality inside the government offices contradicted this public image. The Prime Minister explained that Parliament could not legally ignore a formal submission from a direct descendant of the sovereign regarding trust fund mismanagement. If the independent committee opened a full investigation, they would possess the legal power to subpoena internal palace communication logs. The Crown's private financial arrangements would face public cross-examination for the first time in decades. The situation created an immediate crisis for William's long-term planning. His entire strategy for the future reign depended on total control over the Duchy of Cornwall's financial image. He wanted to project absolute financial separation from the scandals of the previous generation. Beatrice's dossier linked the duchy's modern alternative funding structures directly to the old, hidden accounts of 1993. William took immediate action to isolate the fallout. He requested a formal review of Beatrice's corporate consultancy contracts within the United Kingdom. Several major British tech firms relied on government regulatory clearance for their international operations. Beatrice worked as a high-level strategist for one of these primary firms. William's advisors wanted to see if they could apply pressure to her corporate employers to limit her activities. The strategy backfired within 48 hours. The chief executive of the tech firm sent a confidential letter directly to the Cabinet Office. The company stated that any attempt by the royal household to interfere with an employee's private legal affairs would result in an immediate termination of their UK investment plans. Beatrice was not just a minor princess. Her corporate value was backed by international enterprise capital that the government could not afford to lose. The mystery for the palace advisors shifted to tracking Beatrice's next tactical move. They knew she held the legal dossier and the archival diary entries, but they did not know the exact timeline for her final submission to the parliamentary committee. A security staff member at Windsor Castle noted that Beatrice visited her sister Eugenie at Ivy Cottage 3 times in a single week. The palace launched a discreet monitoring operation of the sisters' shared communication channels. They discovered the answer through an unencrypted calendar invite sent to a prominent human rights lawyer in London. Beatrice and Eugenie were not just planning a financial claim. They were preparing a formal petition to the European Court of Human Rights regarding the selective removal of state-funded protection for female descendants of the royal house. The revelation changed the entire scope of the conflict. A domestic trust fund dispute could be managed through private parliamentary compromises. An international human rights challenge regarding gender discrimination in royal security allocations was a global public relations catastrophe. Beatrice was leveraging her legal training to attack the institution's most vulnerable point, its public reputation for fairness. William realized that his streamlined royal order was unraveling before it even officially began. The tension inside Kensington Palace grew as the legal teams admitted they had no valid defense against a discrimination claim if the duchy's private funding logs were made public. The separate ledger he used to protect his own inner circle was the exact piece of evidence Beatrice needed to prove her case. The Prince of Wales offered a final concession through the Prime Minister's office. He agreed to dismantle the alternative Duchy Security Fund entirely by the end of the fiscal quarter. He proposed a new uniform security standard that would apply equally to all grandchildren of the late Queen Elizabeth, regardless of their working status. The state would not pay for it, but the core royal estate would guarantee equal coverage from its central private reserves. The compromise resolved the immediate threat of the international lawsuit, but it opened a much deeper systemic vulnerability for the future king. By forcing William to alter his security funding structure, Beatrice proved that the new royal order could be dismantled by a single determined family member. If she established a precedent that effectively ended the absolute authority of the central household over the extended family. The final element of her strategy became clear during a family gathering at Sandringham later that winter. Beatrice and Eugenie arrived together, accompanied by their private security details. They did not seek permission from the master of the household for their itinerary. They acted as independent entities operating within the royal sphere. Beatrice met briefly with William in the library before the evening dinner. A staff member present noted that no papers were exchanged during the 5-minute meeting. Beatrice simply informed him that the digital archive containing the trust documents and the diary entries had been duplicated and stored with 3 separate legal firms in New York, London, and Geneva. The files would remain sealed as long as the new security standards were maintained. The quiet princess had successfully checked the power of the future monarch. She did not need to give explosive television interviews or write tell-all books to achieve her goals. She used the institution's own secret history to secure her family's future standing. The traditional palace apparatus was left completely intact on the surface, but the internal balance of power had changed forever behind closed doors. Princess Beatrice has permanently changed the rules of the royal game, proving that absolute silence can be the most devastating weapon of all. The palace wanted a streamlined monarchy, but they never expected a quiet princess to hold the keys to their deepest financial secrets. Now, the central household must live with the reality that their every move is being watched by an independent alliance within their own walls.